Red and blue lights were bouncing off the wet pavement. My cheek was grinding into the hood of my own car, and somebody's knee was digging so hard into my back that I couldn't tell if I was breathing from my chest or pure instinct. I heard a kid crying somewhere near the school doors. I heard phones coming out. I heard an officer's voice in my ear saying, "Stop resisting," even though I wasn't moving at all. And here's the crazy part that nobody believes when they hear it for the first time. 3 days after that moment, those same officers would be standing in formation in full dress uniform, and I would be the man they were calling chief. Let that sink in for a second. The suspicious black man in handcuffs outside the school. That was your incoming chief of police. My name is Wilman Price, and this is not some secondhand story. This isn't something I saw on the news. This is the morning my life took everything I thought I knew about justice and turned it inside out. I've spent over 20 years in law enforcement. I earned my stripes the slow way. Midnight shifts, domestic calls, bad neighborhoods, good people, some very bad people. And I always tried to be that steady guy in the room, the one who followed the rules but didn't forget the humans standing in front of him. I thought that experience meant I understood what people were talking about when they said the system was biased. I thought being the good cop meant I was somehow separate from all that. I was wrong. Crestfield was supposed to be my quiet chapter, you know what I mean? The town where I'd finally get to lead a department, make some real changes, maybe even sleep through the night once in a while. On paper, it looked perfect. Manicured lawns, clean sidewalks, kids riding scooters in cul-de-sacs, neighbors waving from their driveways like something out of a commercial. The brochures all said the same thing in different words: safe, peaceful, family-friendly. But if you've lived long enough, you learn that some places don't put their problems on display. They tuck them behind blinds and polite smiles. That was Crestfield. The coffee shop chatter was friendly, but if you listened closely, you'd hear the little tells. That side of town people like that I didn't want to assume, but you'd hear about who got followed in the grocery store, who got pulled over driving a new car, who the neighbors called about when they saw a face they didn't recognize. The crime stats were low, sure, but the complaints about selective enforcement and overly aggressive stops told a different story if you lined them up. So when the mayor called me and said, "Wilman, we'd like to offer you the position of chief of police," I didn't just hear congratulations. I heard, "We've got smoke in this building and we're hoping you can find where the fire is." I drove down, met with him, and a couple of council members sat in a room with glass walls and filtered water and a framed photo of the town's founding fathers and listened while they danced around the word they didn't want to say. They said things like community tension and perception issues and disproportionate stops. They didn't want to say racial bias out loud, but it was hanging in the air like humidity. I asked a lot of questions about complaints, about discipline, about training, about the neighborhoods that didn't show up on the tourism map. And at the end of it, I told them I was willing to take the job, but I had one condition: no big welcome tour, no glossy press release with my picture on it, no email blasted out to the whole department announcing, "Meet your new chief." I wanted to see how my officers behaved when they didn't know I was the one holding the mirror. The mayor blinked at me, smoothed his tie, and said, "You don't want us to introduce you?" "Not yet," I said. "Let me come in quiet. Let me see the real version first, not the cleaned up one you show the boss. If it were you about to run a department with a reputation problem, what would you have done? Would you want the polite version or the truth with all the sharp edges still on it?" They agreed. We set a date. Monday morning, public ceremony, local news, the whole thing. Until then, on paper, I was hired, but to most of the officers, I was just a name they hadn't heard yet. There was no memo with my face on it floating around the squad room. No, everyone be on your best behavior, the new guy is watching. I was just another man moving into a house on Benson Street with his family and some cardboard boxes. That Friday, 3 days before the ceremony, started out like the kind of morning you don't even notice while it's happening. The kind of morning that only becomes important when you look back and realize where the line was. The rain had come through the night before and left the streets damp, shiny, and the air smelled like wet asphalt and cut grass. My daughter and I have this routine when I'm not on an early shift. I drive her to school, we talk about her day. I try to make her laugh before she goes inside, so she walks in with her shoulders a little lighter. She was in the passenger seat, legs swinging, telling me about some art project that involved paint and glitter, which I knew meant my kitchen was going to pay the price later, and she was debating whether pancakes or waffles were better. I told her, "You finish all your homework this week, Saturday morning is on me, pancakes the size of your head," and she laughed that easy kid laugh that makes everything else feel less heavy for a minute. Under my gray jacket, I was wearing my uniform shirt. Habit. Identity. It's strange when you've worn a badge for so long, you start to feel half-dressed without it even when you're off the clock. I wasn't trying to flash it. I wasn't trying to hide it. It was just there. Part of me. We pulled up near the school, the building all tan brick and glass, that same combination you see in 100 districts across the country. I stopped in the drop-off line, watched her unbuckle and gather her backpack, watched her check that her hair was still okay in the visor mirror. "All right, kiddo," I said, "go make me proud in there." She rolled her eyes in that way only a daughter can, but she smiled. "You say that every day, Dad." "That's because it's true every day," I told her. "Don't forget Saturday. If you want pancakes, those grades better be tight." She grinned, climbed out, shut the door, and jogged toward the front entrance. Halfway up the path, she turned back and waved like she always does. I waved back. That's the last normal moment I remember from that day. I pulled away from the front, found a spot a little down the street, put the car in park. I wasn't in any rush. I checked a couple of emails on my phone, glanced at my schedule, thought about whether I should head home to unpack or swing by the grocery store. Somewhere behind one of those neat curtains in one of those neat houses, somebody looked out their window, saw a black man sitting in a car they didn't recognize outside their child's school, and decided that was a problem. A phone call probably went something like, "Hi, yes, I just wanted to report something. There's a suspicious man sitting in a car by the school. I don't recognize him. I'm just concerned." That word, suspicious, lives in a lot of reports I've read over the years. On paper it sounds neutral, technical even. Out in the world, in certain mouths, it turns into code. Code for "he doesn't look like he belongs here." I didn't know that call had been made yet. All I knew was that a few minutes later, the reflection in my side mirror filled with flashing red and blue, and the quiet street I was parked on suddenly felt like a stage. My stomach did that thing, if you know, that little clutch when you see lights behind you, even though you're sure you haven't done a thing wrong. I put my phone down on the console, rolled both windows down, placed my hands on top of the steering wheel, fingers spread. The engine was still running, and I could hear it hum under the noise of the approaching siren. I watched the cruiser pull in behind me a little too fast for a welfare check, watched another unit slide in behind that one. 2 cars. For a guy parked on the side of the road after dropping his kid off. Already tells you something, doesn't it? The first officer got out, hand already resting near his holster, posture tight. The second moved to the other side of his unit, eyes scanning, jaw clenched. They didn't approach me like someone who might need help. They approached like they'd already made up their minds. I could see their shoulders squared, could feel their read on me before I even heard their voices. "Turn the engine off and step out of the vehicle," the first one barked. No good morning, no sir, no explanation, just a command that hit the air like a slap. Now, I did exactly what I've told countless drivers to do over the years. I moved slow, narrated my movements. "Officer, my name is Willman," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "I'm reaching for the key with my right hand." "All right." I turned the engine off, set the keys on the dash where they could see them, opened the door with my left hand and stepped out with my palms visible. Faced the vehicle, the second one snapped, hands on the hood. I tried again. "Officer, I just dropped my daughter at the school I live in, the Benson house down the street. I actually work in law enforcement." "Hands on." The hood, the first officer repeated, stepping closer like he was daring me not to comply. "You can explain yourself at the station." At the station. I hadn't even given them my name yet, and we were already skipping ahead to the part where I was in a cell. I turned, placed my hands on the hood, the metal still warm from the drive raindrops beating up under my fingers. Under my jacket, my uniform shirt felt like some kind of sick joke. "Sir," I said, "my badge and identification are in the glove compartment. I'm not resisting, I'm actually supposed to be." "Stop talking," he snapped. "We got a call about a suspicious male loitering outside the school. You match the description, you can run your mouth later." That's when it hit me in a way that cut deeper than any training exercise or classroom discussion ever had. They weren't listening for information, they were listening for confirmation. They already had a story in their heads. All I was to them in that moment was a prop in that story. Do you think that's fair? That someone can look at you, not know a single thing about you, and in 10 seconds decide you're nothing but a threat? I felt his hand grab my elbow hard, then both hands as he yanked my arms behind my back. The cuffs clicked around my wrists tighter than they needed to be, metal-biting skin. I've put cuffs on more people than I can count. I know the difference between secure and punishing, and these weren't the gentle kind. He shoved me forward. My chest hit the hood. Then he pushed down more, forcing me lower until my cheek scraped along the metal and then slid off the edge, meeting the cold, gritty surface of the street. For a second, all I could see was gray, the blur of pavement, specks of gravel, the reflection of those flashing lights in a puddle under the bumper. I could hear my own breath bouncing off the hood. I could smell rain exhaust the faint sharpness of fear, and I couldn't tell if it was mine or theirs. Somewhere behind me I heard a small voice say, "Mom, what's happening to that man?" And a woman's voice answer, "Don't look, sweetie, just come on." I heard phones chiming as cameras started recording. I heard the second unit officer mutter something about non-compliant, even though I hadn't moved except where they put me. Inside my head, two parts of me were fighting for attention. The cop in me was cataloging every detail, the exact words they used, the time of day, their positions, the angle of their approach. The father in me was imagining my daughter looking out a classroom window and seeing her dad on the ground, hands locked behind his back, surrounded by uniforms. Then came that line I've heard shouted at so many people on the other side of the badge, "Stop resisting." I wasn't, but they said it anyway, like they needed it on the record. Pattern interrupt for you right here. I want you to stop and put yourself in that scene, not as a viewer, not as the officer, but as the one on the hood. How do you think your heart would be beating? What would you be more afraid of, the physical pain or the knowledge that no matter what you said, nobody in that moment wanted to hear it? They hauled me up and walked me to the back of the cruiser. The cuffs dug in with every step, my shoulders throbbing, my cheek burning where the pavement had kissed it. I didn't fight, didn't twist away, because I knew how fast that would turn into suspect, became combative in the report. They opened the back door, pushed my head down like I was some violent offender, and sat me in the back seat behind the plexiglass. I've ridden in a lot of police cars in my life. I'd never sat in that back corner before, looking out at the world through a smeared window and a metal grate. It's a strange thing seeing your own reflection in that plastic partition, wearing a jacket over a uniform shirt, hands locked together instead of resting on a steering wheel. The ride to the station felt longer than it actually was. They didn't say much, just the occasional coded phrase on the radio, the sound of the engine, the squeak of the wipers pushing away leftover drizzle. I watched the houses roll by and thought about all the times I'd told myself, we're not like those departments on the news, we're better than that. In that back seat, it was hard to believe that anymore. Here's where the story flips. We pulled into the back lot of the station, the gate clanking shut behind us. They walked me inside, past doors I would have had keys to in 3 days, into an intake area I'd toured once in a clean suit when I came to meet the command staff. Now I was seeing it under very different lighting. They sat me in a plastic chair. One officer took my phone, my wallet, my watch, dropped them in a gray bin to be logged. The other took my car keys and said almost casually, "I'm going to go search the vehicle. Not may I not. Do we have your consent? Just a statement." I could have pushed back, I knew the rules, but I just watched him walk out with my keys swinging from his finger. "Name the desk officer," said, fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Wilman Price," I answered. He typed, frowned at the screen. "You new in town?" "Sort of," I said. "My official start date is Monday." "What do you do?" he asked, glancing up, and for just a second there was a crack in the routine, like some instinct told him this wasn't the usual traffic stop gone wrong. "I work in law enforcement," I replied. "Check the glove compartment." He gave me a look I'd seen 1,000 times, that skeptical, everybody says they know somebody look, and went back to his computer. The other officer came back sooner than I expected. His face was different. Some of the color had drained out of it. His hand wasn't as steady as before when he placed my wallet and a laminated ID card onto the desk. He said, clearing his throat, "You might want to see this." The desk officer picked up the card, glanced at it like it was just some license, then stopped. His eyes tracked the words, then snapped up to my face, then back down again like his brain needed an extra second to sync the two images. City seal, photo, title. Chief of Police, Wilman Price. Silence dropped into that room like a brick into water. No one said a word. You could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing. You could hear somebody's printer whirring in the next room. You could hear the officer's breathing change. The one who had cuffed me, the loud one from the street, stared at the card, then at me, then at the card again. His jaw clenched, unclenched. "Is this real?" he asked, but it didn't sound like a challenge, it sounded like a prayer. "Yeah," I said, sitting there in that plastic chair, wrists still cuffed. "In 3 days, I'm supposed to be your new chief. Let me tell you, I have seen some shocked faces in my time. Suspects caught red-handed rookies on their first day out, officers hearing bad news. But I have never seen someone's entire sense of control drain out of them as fast as it did right then." His shoulders collapsed just a little. The other officer's hand actually shook when he reached for the cuff key. "Get those off him," the desk guy said. "Now." The metal came off my wrists, leaving red grooves in the skin. They hovered, not sure if they should apologize, explain, disappear. I flexed my fingers, feeling blood rush back into my hands. And in that moment, I had a decision to make. I could have exploded. I could have raised my voice, slammed my hands on the desk, demanded that internal affairs be called right that second. I could have insisted they be put in cells while I made some calls. I would have had every right to do it. A lot of people hearing this probably think that's exactly what I should have done. But as I sat there rubbing my wrists, looking at those two young men who had just treated me like a criminal outside my own daughter's school, another thought pushed its way in. If I turned this into pure revenge, we'd all learn the wrong lesson. Not 10 minutes later, my phone, now back in my hand, lit up with the mayor's name, Willman. Oh my God, I just heard. Are you all right? This is outrageous. We are going to suspend them immediately. I'll call an emergency meeting. We can issue a statement. I'm all right, I said, physically. I can't believe they did this to you, he kept going, especially knowing who you are. That's the thing, I said quietly. They didn't know who I was. That's the problem we need to look at. He was quiet for a moment on the other end. So what do you want to do? He finally asked. You tell me, and we'll back you. If it were you, and really think about this, would you have gone for their badges right then, or would you have taken a breath and tried something harder? I want them on duty Monday, I said, in uniform, at the ceremony. He was so surprised he forgot to censor himself. You're kidding me. Nope, I said. I want them standing back there with the rest of the officers, and I want every camera in this town pointed at us. There's a lesson here that punishment alone can't teach. Let me handle it. He didn't like it. I could hear it in the way he exhaled. But he trusted me enough to say, all right, they'll be there. Monday came fast. Word had spread like wildfire through the department by then. You know how cops talk. One person tells another, the story grows legs, then wings. By the time the sun came up that morning, every patrol cop, every desk sergeant, every admin assistant knew some version of what had happened. They arrested the new chief. They had him on the ground. They found out who he was in the station. The details got fuzzy, as gossip always does, but the core was the same. The courtyard outside the station was dressed up like a postcard. Flags, podium, neat rows of folding chairs. Local news vans parked along the curb, their satellite masts poking up into the sky. City council members in their best suits, school principals, community leaders, the mayor with his practiced smile just a little tighter than usual. In front of the building, lined up in rows, stood the officers of the Crestfield Police Department in full dress uniform hats tucked under their arms. I walked out in my own dress uniform, the gold badge on my chest catching in the morning light. The murmur of the crowd dipped for a second, then rose again. As I stepped up to the small stage, I let my eyes track over the rows of officers until I found them, the two from that Friday. They were in the back row, standing at attention, faces, pale eyes forward. If you didn't know, you would have thought they were just nervous for the ceremony. I knew better. The mayor did his introduction, the usual scripted phrases. Distinguished career commitment to justice, a new chapter for Crestfield. I heard the words, but my mind was already on what I was going to say. I hadn't written it down. I didn't want it to sound like a speech. I wanted it to sound like what it was, a man telling the truth. When he finally said, "Please welcome our new Chief of Police, Willman Price," the audience applauded, some warmly, some politely. I stepped up to the microphone, adjusted it a little, looked out at that mix of faces, officers, families, reporters, kids who had no idea how much this moment might shape their town. I could stand here and give you the usual talk I started. I could thank you for your confidence, talk about honor and service and all the right words you're supposed to say on a day like this. I let that hang for a second. But if we start this relationship with a script, we're going to miss the truth that's staring us in the face. You could feel the attention sharpen, like everyone collectively leaned in an inch. So let me tell you what actually happened 3 days ago, I said. Because I don't want to pretend it didn't, and I don't want any of you to hear it as a rumor in the parking lot when you could hear it from me right here. I heard the rustle of fabric as some of the officers shifted on their feet. The two in the back row didn't move. On Friday morning, I continued. I drove my daughter to school right up the street. After I dropped her off, I parked for a few minutes along the road. Somebody in this neighborhood saw me and called the police to report a suspicious man outside the school. Officers responded, approached my vehicle, ordered me out, placed me in handcuffs, and pressed my face onto the hood of my own car in full view of that school building. You could have heard a pin drop. I tried to tell them who I was, I told them I worked in law enforcement. I told them my identification was in the glove compartment. It didn't matter. The decision had already been made in their minds. I was not a father, not a neighbor, not a man they might one day salute. I was a problem to be controlled. I didn't look at the two officers when I said that. I looked at everyone. Because if we were going to talk about this, we were going to talk about the culture, not just the individuals. At the station I went on, they processed me like any other detainee, took my belongings, started the paperwork. Then one of them opened the glove compartment of my car and found a laminated card with my picture on it and the words, Chief of Police, Willman Price, under the city seal. In that moment, everything changed. The cuffs came off. The tone shifted. The apologies started. I paused, let my gaze sweep the courtyard. Now, at this point in the story, most people expect me to say I fired those officers on the spot, that I demanded they be punished, that I refused to work with them. And trust me, there was a part of me that wanted exactly that. I'm human. I was angry. I was humiliated. I had gravel on my face when I walked into that station. I took a breath and let it out slowly. But here's what I realized standing in that intake room with the marks from the cuffs still on my wrists. If I made this all about what they did to me, we'd walk away thinking the real problem is that they picked the wrong guy to mess with. We'd tell ourselves, if they had just known it was the chief, this wouldn't have happened. And we'd feel better without fixing a single thing. I leaned a little closer to the mic, not to shout, but to close the distance between me and the people listening. The truth is, this never should have happened to anyone. Not to me, not to any father in this town, not to any kid walking home, not to any person whose only crime is making somebody with a phone feel uncomfortable. I let that land. So I made a decision. I chose not to press charges. I chose not to demand their badges. I chose something harder. I told the mayor, leave them on duty. Let them stand out here today. Let them be part of what we build next. I could see some people in the crowd wrestling with that even from where I stood. Some nodded. Some frowned. A reporter scribbled faster. And this is where I'm going to ask you to stick around, I said, looking briefly at one of the cameras. Because what happens next, if we do it right, is going to blow your mind a lot more than any story about a chief getting revenge on two cops who made a bad call. From there, I laid out what we were going to do. Not as a neat bullet point list, but as a promise. We are going to change how this department thinks about power and trust, I said. We are not going to treat bias training like a checkbox we tick once a year so we can say we did it. We're going to sit in circles, not rows, not behind desks, with community members, and listen to what it feels like to see our lights in their rearview mirror. We're going to walk our neighborhoods on foot, no windows, no steel between us and the people we serve. We're going to make sure every officer in this department understands that the badge on their chest is not a shield against accountability. It's a responsibility to carry other people's fear and try not to add to it. I turned toward the rows of officers. That includes the two men who put me in cuffs on Friday, I said plainly. They are not going to hide. They are going to show up to those circles. They are going to walk those streets. They are going to look people in the eye, people who look like me, people who have their own stories of humiliation and fear. And they are going to listen without excuse. And if they can grow from that, if they can change, then there is hope for this department. If they can't, they won't last here. It's that simple. Was everyone happy with that? No. Some folks wanted a public hanging, metaphorically speaking. Some wanted names named heads rolled a clean break. Others wanted me to downplay the whole thing, smooth it over so the town wouldn't look bad. I disappointed both sides that day. But that's how change usually starts, in the uncomfortable middle where nobody gets everything they want. Over the next weeks and months, we did exactly what I said we would. We started conversation nights at the station, not PR events, real sessions where anyone could come in, sit in a circle with officers and talk. We heard stories that made some of my guys stare at the floor, stories of stops for broken taillights that magically fixed themselves as soon as the driver was white, stories of kids frisked on their way to the store, stories of mothers who felt their blood pressure spike every time their sons left the house. We started walk and talks in every neighborhood, especially the ones that felt over-policed and underprotected. No agenda, no sting operations disguised as outreach, just walking, talking, hearing people's names instead of just their addresses from dispatch logs. And those two officers, yes, them, were right in the thick of it. I put them on community detail, on youth programs, on school visits. I watched them shift from defensive, we were just following procedure, to quiet then, to something that looked a lot like remorse. The first time I heard one of them say, "I'm sorry," to a room full of residents, I knew we'd cracked something open. Crestfield changed too, in small ways that only become visible when you compare the before and after. You'd see an officer at a cookout in a park not to shut it down, but to flip burgers and talk about the game. You'd see kids calling officers by their first names, not because they were too casual, but because they actually knew them. You'd see fewer cars pulled over for fitting a description and more for, actual violations. Every morning I still drove my daughter to that same school. We still argued about pancakes and waffles, we still joked in the car. She still turned and waved halfway up the path. But every time I pulled away from that curb, every time I drove past the stretch of road where those lights had filled my mirror, I felt the ghost of that day sitting in the passenger seat with me. One morning months later, one of those officers was directing traffic out front. He saw my car, straightened up a little, and raised his hand in a half wave. My daughter saw him too. As she unbuckled, she leaned in and whispered, "Is that one of the guys? Kids always know more than you think." "Yeah," I said quietly. "That's one of them." She frowned, studying his face for a second. "Do you still trust him?" Loaded question right there in the front seat. I trust that he's trying, I said after a moment. And I trust that I'm not going to stop pushing him to be better. That's the tension I live with now, and I think it's the tension a lot of us live with when we talk about justice. How do you hold people accountable without turning every mistake into a life sentence? How do you protect yourself and your community without becoming the thing you're afraid of? So let me put it to you straight, because this is where your voice actually matters. Do you think I made the right call keeping those officers on, making them part of the change instead of just throwing them out and moving on? If you were in my position, if it were your face that hit that hood, your wrists in those cuffs, your child in that school, what would you have done when you found out they were going to be your officers? Some of you are going to say I was too soft, that the only language systems understand is punishment. Some of you are going to say I was too harsh, that I should have just chalked it up to a misunderstanding and moved on. And some of you maybe are going to feel that uncomfortable pull right in the middle where you're glad they didn't get away with it scot-free, but you're also glad they got the chance to grow. That's the space I'm asking you to think about. Because at the end of the day, real power is not the ability to put someone on the ground and make them comply, and it's not the ability to sign a piece of paper and end someone's career. Real power is understanding how it feels to be on the ground yourself, and then deciding you don't want anyone else to feel that way if you can help it. So yeah, that happened. Your new chief of police got taken down outside his daughter's school by his own officers before they ever knew his name. And yeah, those same officers are still on my force. Not because what they did was okay, but because I believe what happens after a mistake can matter more than the mistake itself. Now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me what you think. Did I do the right thing, or would you have handled it differently? Have you ever had an encounter with police, good or bad, that stuck with you? Change the way you see that badge when you pass it on the street. I want to hear those stories. I want you to argue with me if you feel like it. I want you to tell me where you think the line should be between punishment and redemption. If this story made you feel something, anger, hope, frustration, all of the above, hit that like button so more people see it, share it with someone who needs to understand how this looks from the other side of the lights, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next time we sit down and talk honestly about the things most people only whisper about. Because as long as there are people out there who feel powerless, we've still got work to do. And who knows, the next story we tell might be yours.